Hello, everyone, and welcome to our it's our third annual Analyst Relations webinar. We like to pride ourselves on being the first webinar for Everest Group in January, coming out of the holiday season. But our goal has always been to offer Analyst Relations professionals something specific to their perspective of the work that they do and their companies. And so you'll hear some things here today that we hope, as you walk away from the webinar, you can apply to your work and your thinking about your work. So I'm very excited to be joined by my two colleagues who are super knowledgeable and experienced in their spaces, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. So looking at our agenda, we're going to begin by providing you with an overview of what we've observed as being key sentiments in the marketplace among the enterprises that we all serve. And then from there, we're going to look at what we are finding to be key trends that will shape 2025. And Rajesh and Alisha will take us through that part of the conversation, looking at the opportunities as well as the challenges that we think will characterize the 12 months ahead. And then lastly, based on what we've learned in the previous sections, we're going to offer some specific comments about the IT, business process, technology markets that are relevant for what analyst relations professionals are asked to do with their organization. So it'll be a combination of looking at what the market dynamics mean for AR people, but it will also, I'll include some content that is based on my interaction as the AR engagement specialist here at Everest Group with yourselves, your clients, and I have the opportunity to look across the market broadly, and therefore I've had some observations that I hope you'll find valuable as well. So before sharing some of the findings we've been talking about, I do want to make a point that a lot of the data and the observations about the market that you'll see in the coming slides are based on the fact that Everest Group throughout the year has numerous touch points on the buy side of the market, the enterprises that we all service. And in addition to that, we do conduct an annual comprehensive survey of enterprises. And you'll see the data from that reflected in what's about to be shared. And I wanted you to have an idea of the thoroughness of that or the characteristics of that survey so that you know how to think about what you're learning. So first of all, we have over 200 large organizations that participated. And the study was conducted, it's a fairly fresh study conducted in late October, early November. And so the findings are coming out at the time when a lot of companies are doing their annual planning activities. So these include 13 major industry groupings and the strong focus areas, the ones where we had a lot more participation were CPG, high tech, manufacturing, banking and financial services, among others. The respondents are primarily from buying regions in North America and Western Europe and the UK. The revenue profile for all of these firms is over $1 billion. So that was one of the things I noticed about our data set is that the majority of our respondents were companies that had at least $1 billion in revenue. And the roles from their organizations, the kind of stakeholders they have included sourcing, procurement, and vendor management, technology and IT, engineering, and customer experience. So with that background in place, let me begin our presentation and move on to our first content slide. So one of the things that we wanted to share is some good news. What we found is that about 80% of our respondents, as you can see here, when they were asked, how do they feel about the business growth for 2025? What does the climate look like for them? And again, this is in late October, early November. About 80% of them are either somewhat optimistic or highly optimistic. And so that's kind of a good place to begin the year. What we want to look at next, of course, is what is the context? What's driving this optimism? What is the framework behind this optimism? And what we find is that as we look at the optimism, we ask them, well, what are the challenges that you anticipate seeing? We've asked this question over several years, and so we have a little bit of a longitudinal perspective that, things like cost and margin pressures, adapting to customer needs, and, there's always a potential slowdown in demand are usually the kinds of concerns that companies have around that growth horizon that they're anticipating. The one interesting thing that stood out is that compared to past years, the concerns that our market has around regulation, and perhaps it's due to new administration here in the United States, or the fact that generally around the world, we've seen shifts in macro political sentiments and governance, that could there be changes in the regulatory environment when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to ESG, when it comes to regulation of technology? So that uncertainty has risen in the minds of large organizations around the world and has clearly gained consideration. And we'll hear more about that as we get into the trends analysis portion of our presentation. That kind of growth that the growth that we are anticipating does come with some considerations, shall we say. Our findings are that companies will continue to be very cost conscious, and there's a key focus on enhancing profitability. The mechanisms that folks anticipate using in targeting that profitability goal is improved productivity, managing their people costs, especially now that technology is part of the conversation around talent, and looking at, for example, from a services standpoint, how do you optimize the shoring mix in your portfolio, for example. However, at the same time, companies are also looking at a mandate to accelerate their revenue growth. So the need to be a bit protective of the characteristics of that growth is a little outweighed by the need to drive growth. And I think this is an important thing to keep in mind, that growth expectation is now a little bit heavier than it had been previously. Not that growth isn't usually, but the focus on growth is seen to be a priority going forward. So how do you do that? You innovate your products and services. You continue to invest in customer experience. And we're getting more and more focus on brand reputation. And so as we look at that profitable growth, we actually wanted to ask you as our audience to give us some input. We've got a poll here that I'd like to ask to be opened for our audience. But the question is, as a provider of services yourselves and technology yourselves, how does your firm expect political and economic factors to be affecting your business going forward? And while you're putting your answers into the tool, I wanted to ask Alisha. Alisha, you look at a lot of issues on a global basis, and you speak, daily to different kinds of enterprises. What are you finding they're concerned about when it comes to the topic of global politics and dynamics? Do they have a concern, or is it, not a consideration?
Yeah, absolutely, Katrina. That's a very interesting question. And I think that's something that almost every other client that we are speaking to, every other service provider stakeholder is asking this. How is the global political environment, regulatory environment going to change because of the changes in regime in a lot of countries? And when we think about these changes in regime, we are talking about or as many as 50 nations across the world which held their national elections in 2024, which is a massive change from a regulation standpoint, from political standpoint. If I talk about the two major economies, North America and the European region. In North America, I think with the Trump administration coming in, it's going to be a mixed bag, we believe. The impact, there is an expectation of higher deregulation, but at the same time, more tariffs and, some other implications on certain product-led, product-centric organizations, whereas on certain service-centric organizations, the net impact seems to be positive. So it's going to be a net, it's going to be a mixed bag of, in certain regions, in certain industries, it's a positive impact. In certain industries, it's going to be a negative impact. But for the current visibility that we have, I think what we are believing is that organizations themselves are starting to become a lot more comfortable with what they are expecting in 2025. And that's why they believe that the net impact is not going to be significantly negative. And that's the reason that we see a much more positive sentiment for the coming year from most of the organizations.
Okay, well, what I'm hoping to do is post the results. I'm looking at the results, but Raphael, will they come up on the screen or should I read them out to our audience?
They are shared on the screen.
Okay. Well, what I'm seeing is that the highest response rate comes from, there's concern in the market. There's a somewhat negative impact that's expected, about 35%, and limited impact coming from about 33%. So to Alisha's point about there being sentiments on both sides, there's actually some folks who feel that about 25% of our audience feels that there's somewhat of a positive impact, and only about 8% that expect a significant positive impact. So, people are kind of on the fence with that, it looks like. So thank you, everyone.
Katrina, if I may add, sorry, if I may add on this,
no,
right?
I was about to ask you, Rajesh. I was about to ask you, based on your conversations with senior leaders at both technology and services companies, as well as enterprises, what do you think this means for 2025? And can you take us into the next part of our conversation about the trends that this translates to?
Yeah, I mean, the two parts to it. One is just the reflection on this poll result. I'd see this to be a kind of mixed bag with still a skew towards positive, because if I start to aggregate, 33% are saying somewhat positive to significant positive. No one is saying significant negative. And 1/3 of the poll respondents are saying limited impact. And at one level, if it is a limited impact for political and economic factor, it's actually net positive, right? So that you can kind of focus on what you need to do without worrying too much about the macro of political and economic environment that, frankly, as an organization, you cannot control, right? So, and this is kind of somewhat consistent with what Alisha was mentioning, right? Which will kind of explore as we go along in this particular session.
Yeah, so we already have a couple questions that came in, and because they're both similar and it's, I think, pertaining to the comments that you're making, I want to get those into the conversation. So question is basically, as we look at the enterprise perceptions, expectations for 2025, do we see any differences by regions or geographies? So any thoughts from either of you in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, and we will kind of explore that a little, right? Especially in the global services perspective, right? Ultimately, as Alisha was mentioning, I think there are 3 or 4 vectors to look at it, right? The first vector is just from hey, what part of the market is going to behave? Whether the IT, business process, some others, how are they going to behave? Second vector is, what kind of geographies is North America, US versus Europe versus APAC, are they going to behave differently? And the third is, of course, the industry part of the picture. One of the things is clear that, and I'm just kind of letting the cat out of the bag, is we do expect a kind of rebound for global services in the backdrop, the backdrop that you set it up. But this is not going to be the case of rising tide that will lift all boats, right? Which is okay. So which is the first trend, right? Of the big picture that you set up, Katrina. Again, the good news here is that the global services industry is set to rebound in 2025, right? And before we get into the numbers, we need to kind of also understand what are enterprises really looking to achieve through their global services initiatives. And if you think about it, it ties very nicely with some of the enterprise objective, which was driving profitable growth, right? So they want to drive growth, but it's not that the cost and margin pressures have gone away. right? And so within that context, if you look at global services, they do want to leverage it to streamline processes and optimize cost. They want to kind of leverage to kind of continue to drive the digital transformation. At the same time, one major change that is happening, and that's also a reflection of the maturity of the global services industry, is that they expect it to contribute to the top line, right? And that's how some of the initiatives and projects and all those things that organizations trying to achieve through either their GBS in-house model outsourcing is changing, right? So earlier it was largely around how do you optimize, but now it is increasingly about how do you create a top line impact. So net of that is, as you can see, this ties very well with driving profitable growth agenda that enterprises have. Okay, so if you move to the next page. So as a result, again, the good news here is we see enterprises looking to increase their budget on global services spend. This is a reflection of confidence, right? And also alignment to their end business goals, right? So compared to 2024, when we asked this and we kind of asked this question, and the response that we got was 3.1%, which is kind of doubling to 7.2%, slightly more than that, right? So it's a good news. It's kind of testament of enterprises looking to achieve more through their global services initiative. If you move to the next one, what it translates into is, again, rise in both what we see the GBS, GCC part of the equation, as well as outsourcing. What you see here is the outsourcing market. Last 2 years have been a tough year. If you were to kind of think about it, after the highs of coming out of the COVID, right? We went to low single digit, which further declined in 2024. But 2025, because of the reasons that I talked about, we are expecting it to be much more positive. So the industry is going to go back to the 5.3%, which is kind of a long-term average of the industry. So it's not a kind of a while the slope of the curve may reflect a steep recovery, but it's not a kind of a great recovery as recovery that we have seen post-COVID. And that's why my earlier comment is, hey, it's not going to be the case of rising tide lift all boats. So, for example, in North America and US, we are much more bullish about BFS as industry, or as a BFSI industry. We see discretionary spend coming back. We see organizations who have put some of those initiatives on hold. They are wanting to get onto this, right? So there's a kind of a momentum there. But so that's kind of industry. Of course, you can contrast with different industries. If you take a geo view, we see some continued challenge in Europe. Well, some of these challenges can again spur certain activities which can help the specific pockets of IT business process industries, as well as some of the tech side of the equation. APAC, we continue to believe to be outgrowing what we are saying as the kind of a growth for the global market. So again, it varies across some of these dimensions that we talked about. And lastly, this is not going to be a case of correlation between growth and headcount, right? And shouldn't come as a surprise to this particular audience that there's a lot of focus and attention on increasing productivity, right? So again, as you kind of think about, we showed you roughly 5.3% growth that we are expecting in outsourcing. In GBS, we expect around, again, 6 to 7% of growth. So cumulative, we expect around 6.5% growth. But the headcount growth is still, is like half of it, which suggests that enterprises really looking at various forms of productivity. Of course, the automation was already there. They're thinking about AI, and we'll touch upon the Gen AI part of the equation. But that's part of the equation remains very important, right? In the sense that, hey, how do I again, this is not going to be a FT linked growth that we're going to see in 2025, and I would say in the future as well.
We had a pre-event question from one of our audience members, and I think the content here on this slide might be relevant for their question, which was, where is the next frontier for delivery? Is India a star on the rise? Perhaps a different geography? What can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, we just, I think, we released one of our location state of the market report earlier this year. India and Philippines continue to remain number one, number two location of choice, right? Both combined together contribute to around 50% of the global services headcount, services, and so on and so forth. And APAC specifically, they contribute to 80%. Having said that, there are some other countries and regions that are emerging. So, for example, in APAC, Malaysia, we are seeing some action here. In Europe, of course, Eastern European location like Romania and Poland were always there. The conflict actually created the risk, increased the risk perception, which also led to we seeing increased interest and setup of location of some of these delivery locations in Spain and Portugal, right? Similarly, as you kind of go along, you will kind of find different elements. So that's the kind of a country and region view, right? Again, we have a lot of those details as part of our location optimization work that we do day in day out with a lot of our clients. We publish a lot of research report around that as well. But one more thing that I wanted to quickly add here is one of the other big shift that we are seeing is movement towards tier 2 and tier 3 locations, right? So even if you take India as an example, there's a heightened interest to leverage tier 2 and tier 3 locations to tap onto the talent pool, to continue to manage the cost part of the equation, which also stems from the attrition part, which also stems from the wages thing. So that's another quick trend that I wanted to highlight.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And as you said, we have a big body of research that is available for those that want to explore these geography issues a little bit more. Alisha, Rajesh shared his thoughts on the outlook for the global services industry broadly. A little bit of a focus more on the services side of the equation. But what are you seeing as someone who specializes in technology, engineering, services, and so forth? What are you seeing about the specific role of technology itself in the solutions that are coming to market? What role is the technology playing versus the services in addressing the actual outcome that the client is trying to affect with these investments?
Yeah, that's a very important point, Katrina, that we are seeing an interesting trend that we observed in this year as we spoke to a lot of enterprises was this trend towards integration of IT and operations, bringing them both together. Essentially, what organizations are increasingly realizing is that IT and business aren't separate. IT is business, business is IT. They have to be together. And that's a movement that we are seeing in the organizations. A lot of large enterprises adopting what they call product-led operating model, where there is no separate IT team and a separate business team, but it's the whole team together comprising of IT people and business people together working towards that end goal. And of course, technology plays a very important foundational role in enabling that move. And the objective of this move is, to address all of the challenges that we spoke about a while ago, being able to move as per the pace of the market, being able to address the evolving client demands, or just the business objectives of being more agile, being more cost efficient, being more resilient. All of those are objectives that organizations are starting to focus on. So essentially, technology is starting to become the powerhouse of achieving those business objectives that the organizations are trying to achieve. Now, as we think about this technology equation, and to your question around technology versus services, I think a lot of times what organizations do is they get into this mistake of we have invested in technology and we should get the ROI out of it. And that's where the problem lies, because technology alone doesn't solve any problem. It's not the complete equation. Technology plus services together. So what you spend, if you go to the next slide, so what you invest in buying the software plus the investment that you need to do of using the software together is the entire equation of the investment that you're making, and the ROI that will emerge out of it needs to be calculated basis that holistic approach that you take. So it's not just about investing in technology, but it's also about making sure that you are applying the technology in the right way, using it in the right way for the organization to achieve the end objectives. And it's because of this issue that a lot of organizations do not invest in it in the right way. And just thinking about the investment that they've done in, say, licensing, there are a lot of organizations who have failed miserably, or there are a large number of organizations that we speak to who say we have not received the right ROI from our investments. The problem is not technology. The problem is all the other things around technology, how they are put together to make the technology work in your favor. And for that reason, as we think about this product-led operating model, that just is a very, very holistic approach towards how organizations are thinking about reorienting themselves. And there are 5 dimensions to it, which are beautifully put together: reinventing organizational design, redefining the processes in which they work, because it's not two separate IT and business, but it's all clubbed together; reshaping the talent who works on these technology platforms and the new processes; and reimagining the core technology as a platform. All of this, as it is put together, it also requires redesigning of how you measure the outcomes. These outcomes aren't separate IT outcomes or business outcomes anymore, but these are business aligned objectives and key results, OKRs as they are called. And we have surveyed a lot of organizations who are already in this journey, and I'm using the word journey very, very cautiously, and very this is a journey. It's not an initiative. Organizations, when they embark on this journey, those who have achieved some meaningful milestones in this journey, or those who have achieved a significant progress in this journey, have been able to achieve meaningful outcomes from this entire investment, across all different dimensions, be it top line revenue and profitability, top line and bottom line impact, or be it in terms of operational cost reduction, or in terms of increasing their agility, in terms of customer satisfaction, or even employee satisfaction. Overall, it's making the organizations a lot more ready to function in an environment that's requires agility, that requires rapid thinking and quick innovation. Katrina.
Yeah, so Rajesh, my thought goes, as Alisha's talking about this message that it's not the services and it's not the technology, they don't operate in silos. It's the integration of the two, right? So in my mind, nowhere is this more critical than in the case of Gen AI. And it's the G word that's part of every conversation, but it's one that is our reality. So can you help us take a closer look on where are we with the adoption of Gen AI, and in what cases are we seeing people go forward with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Katrina. So again, this is a case of glass half full or half empty, right? So that's a kind of a case. I think the key thing that we are seeing is, yes, there has been initial roadblocks, initial hiccups, so on and so forth. But Gen AI as an area, as a concept, as a technology continues to have a lot of interest, and significant amount of organizations continue to believe in the potential of it, right? So just to start with a sobering part of it, 2023 and 2024 were the years of a lot of exploration, a lot of experimentation, and of course, a lot of failures. What this chart does not reflect, but it's important to kind of also notice the trend. So when we analyze it 2023, we saw the failure rate was 90%. So in 2024, the failure rate has come down to 70%, right? So it's a kind of again, it's a high volume of failure rate, right? Especially with all the effort that is going on and so on and so forth. But if you see the trend, it is kind of moving in a positive direction, right? Of course, the reason behind some of these failures are, we call it 3 U's, lack of clarity and uncertainty, unpreparedness and affordability, right? So that's the kind of, again, the point here. Yes, there have been failure, there have been setback, but it is improving. So that's the first point, right? That as we kind of go to the next slide, Katrina, and I was saying, hey, having said that, no one, I mean, enterprise is not saying that, hey, this is some kind of a, just a kind of a vaporware or what have you. If you look at their spend focus in 2025, actually generative AI is number one, right? Followed up by cybersecurity and so on and so forth. But it continues to validate that the point is organizations are putting in effort, are going to put in effort to harness what is and can be a truly transformative technology breakthrough. Okay, so that's the kind of a point. And then to your point, if you go back to the next slide, yeah, and this is not our research. This is when we did this another, of this webinar towards the end of last year for all enterprises. And we asked them, hey, where have you adopted Gen AI at scale? This is their response, right? Again, this is subset of those enterprises who attended our webinar, but we just wanted to kind of show that a little. No surprises that customer service was kind of a number one, right? But we were a little surprised by that audience that, they're saying industry specific operations are saying 20%. Our expectation was sales and marketing as an area is going to be higher. In fact, our research, which is based on a lot of other, broad-based data point and so on and so forth, we are seeing a lot of movement and traction around sales and marketing for a variety of good reasons that we can talk about separately. Okay. If we continue to kind of move on, so of course we're talking about the Gen AI, and sometimes it feels like, hey, Gen AI is a passe because you got to talk about agentic AI. Again, we need to realize that agentic AI is another form of Gen AI, right? Where the language here is the process. Now, again, agentic AI is truly transformative because if you think about just the way Gen AI has been presented, it is largely about either synthesis or creation, but not really action. Agentic AI turns some of these synthesis, interpretation, contextualization into action, right? So it is, again, very, very transformative. At the same time, we got to realize that it is at the early stages of maturation, right? Again, some of the Gen AI element, which is the foundation of it, needs to mature for the agentic AI power to be unlocked, right? So net of that is, again, this is something that we cannot ignore. We have to kind of keep an eye on. We'll have to start experimenting. We know that then, you can't, I mean, these are not pre-packaged solutions. None of these are pre-packaged solutions, right? That we also need to realize. So you will have to kind of do that, go through this, some bit of a failure, some bit of setback, but you can't ignore it for sure. And that is what we are kind of hearing from enterprises. And that is also a significant implication for both services and tech providers in this journey.
So Rajesh, as this journey takes place and we move across these different waves, we are hearing about different attitudes, concerns that are calling for regulation. And there's different approaches to regulation by different governments, across different geographies. Just real quick, because I do want to give Alisha a chance to cover the next topic, but real quick, any kind of observations that you think this audience needs to know about?
Yeah, so I'll make it really quick, high level observation. We see this to be much more prominent, or going to be much more prominent in Europe. And no surprises. And it's going to be lesser, especially with the new regime in the US, right? So I'm just talking about the impact of regulation or the kind of a regulatory oversight that is going to come through. One additional quick point that I would still make is, industries/functions which are much more regulatory exposed are going to see slower adoption. This is coming from all my conversation with the enterprise side regulatory, in industries which are kind of heavily regulated. There, the adoption is going to be slower compared to non-regulated industries and functions.
Right, right. That makes sense. So Alisha, the thought that obviously comes to my mind is, as you see these shifts happening in the technology landscape, what does this mean for the partnerships in the industry out there? This could be partnerships between enterprises and their service providers. It could be the partnerships that are more go-to-market oriented between services and technology providers. Can you take us into that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a point that we always find a lot of interest from our audience on, to understand what's the feedback, what's the sentiment of enterprises as they think about their partner mix and how they're going to change or not change that partner mix. So what we found this time was that organizations plan to rebalance their provider mix and target certain high velocity outcomes. What they are chasing is to get to the outcomes faster, and those who can help them achieve this are the ones who they're going to be preferring than the others. Now, looking at the trend of how the average satisfaction with their partners has evolved over the years, we see that it has stuck to a specific range. In this range of 4.5 to 4.7, 4.8 range is what we are seeing. In the year, the post-pandemic year is when the feedback was much, much stronger. The perception was much stronger. But over the last few years, the drivers for low satisfaction has constantly been the same. They expect more agility, they expect better innovation. They feel that there is a lot of inconsistent performance amongst their partners, and they expect more continuity in support and more streamlined support to them. And those are certain things that have continued to have a lot of dissatisfaction, continue to drive dissatisfaction amongst organizations, or rather I should say a mediocre range of satisfaction. So it's not, even after tremendous amount of investments from the service provider community, I would believe. And I say that with a lot of conviction because I see a lot of investments from a Gen AI standpoint, from innovation labs, and a lot of different things from a talent standpoint. But we believe there is still a lot more expectations because of the increased competition in the market as well. And as we think about how all of this is going to translate into how organizations think about their service provider mix, as we go to the next slide, again, as we compare it from what they were thinking in 2024 to 2025, a large part of the organizations believe that they want to make some significant changes to their provider mix, and they want to include some new providers. At the same time, there's also a significant number, another 37%, who believe that they do not want to make any service provider mix change, as in they are not going to add any new providers, but they may rebalance work across different providers. Now, the interesting observation that we had in these two data points, the 37% who said they want to rebalance work, were primarily those who were referring to their IT and business process estates. And in these areas is where over the last few years, we have seen massive amount of consolidation exercises happening. So as organizations have consolidated their provider landscape, they've down selected few providers, just top a couple of providers that they're working with. Now they are looking at who are the providers who can offer them the best level of productivity, best level of automation, agility, and all the other efficiency improvement and cost improvement benefits that they are driving. And those are the ones who are going to get a lion's share of the work, or of the of that pie within the organization context. Whereas this 40% who want to include new providers are those who are focusing on more project-based engagements, more discretionary spend. Think about CXM related investments, or think about engineering services related investments. And these are the ones who are willing to engage with certain niche industry specific providers or region specific providers who can help them address certain specific problem statements, certain specific technology support that they need, or some new platform or technology solution that these new providers have come up with, and organizations are willing to experiment with those. So there are nuances in terms of how organizations are thinking about their provider, but what's also clear is that they expect a lot more from their current set of providers, and just, the status quo is not going to help them.
So Alisha, is part of that new expectation at all associated with the service provider bringing in more or specific types of technology partnerships into the equation?
Well, absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons that's driving it. Also, as I was talking about the product and IT coming together, and technology essentially helping them drive their business objectives. So until and unless the service provider community aligns themselves to the business value that the organizations are targeting, it's very difficult for the enterprise themselves to associate the ROI from that provider that they are receiving to and associated to the business value.
So that's a conundrum that I think a lot of organizations are struggling with. So thank you to Alisha and Rajesh for getting us to this point in the conversation. I think from this point on, I want to take what you've shared with us and bring it into the context of the day-to-day realities of what an analyst relations professional experiences. And so one of the things that I want to do first is to let the folks in our audience know that as an AR Pro, we try to meet you where you are. And one of the things that we do is a quarterly analyst relations newsletter. It brings you up to speed on all of the recent publications, hot topics, links to recent blogs and thought leadership and so forth. And that goes out on a quarterly basis. So if you aren't already receiving it, please do join the distribution list for that, and you'll start getting them. The other thing is that as somebody who's signed up for and participated in our session today, if you're interested in learning more about what kind of work Everest Group is doing, if you have a problem and you'd like to bounce some ideas off of somebody in terms of how can you tackle addressing that, or your organization has come to you with a similar kind of issue, we're happy to have a conversation. So our Zoom organizers are pushing out links that you can click on and let us know what that is, and somebody from our team will get back to you. You'll also be getting some emails after the conversation today, and that's another chance for you to express that interest. But with that, I wanted to take this opportunity to put some pieces together. So we've heard quite a bit today so far about the growth opportunities in the marketplace, and that companies and enterprises are focused on growth, which means your companies of either technology or service vendors and providers have an opportunity to help them grow, which means your business can grow. So it's all about growth. And in my view, analyst relations professionals are very well suited and positioned to be enablers of the decisions and the practices that drive that growth for your company, right? Growth doesn't happen in a void. And everybody wants effective and intelligent growth, right? They want to put their energy and their efforts in the areas that are most likely to result in the largest amount of yield. And I think the access to information and knowledge that an AR professional has is in many cases undervalued as a mechanism for helping with that growth. So the next several points that I'm going to make fall under that frame or that thesis that AR teams are uniquely positioned to bring intelligence that drives growth. So we've been hearing a lot about Gen AI in general, and when I interact with AR folks and attend events and conferences and so forth, there's always a lot of conversation these days about Gen AI and analyst relations. And there's a fear that will it decrease the need for analyst relations? Can people get research out in the marketplace without having to go through an AR team? I actually think it's the opposite opportunity here. I think Gen AI can actually help empower AR to drive more value. And one of them is the fact that there are a lot of use cases out there that position AR to be a resource for in-time and very targeted intelligence for your teams to be more effective. So here are some examples. You can build summaries and analysis from across multiple reports that maybe are put out by an analyst that you follow closely. Can you create a summary of that report and make that available, of those multiple reports, and make that available? Not only are you becoming a point of information and resource, but you're better leveraging the research that your company has invested in. Another example is you need to do a scan of a topic, and you're invested in a few different research firms. Can you combine a to-the-point summary across the different research firms to bring a combined perspective to your internal stakeholders? How about becoming a content creator yourself? In other words, you have access to all this content. Can you create a channel of your own in some kind of a corporate collaboration site, Microsoft Teams or something else? And it takes a little bit of effort to put that together, and as well as to let people know. But if you can develop a brand for yourself and a channel for yourself, then the people that you interact with as stakeholders will know that there's a credible source that they can self-serve at any time through that channel, and you become the creator of net new content that's relevant and customized and contextualized for your organization. From a sales standpoint, can you compile the access you have to research to build intelligence on a target account or the interests of a particular key salesperson and make that available to them? These are ideas that I've heard discussed and we've explored as Everest Group, but I wanted to put them all together in one spot. The RFI piece is what so many AR people look forward to simplifying through Gen AI. So one of the things I wanted to mention is today, maybe the equation is, how do we manage the workflow and the checks, the balances, the project management around RFIs to make sure that the effort is less as well as better? And eventually, through integration, through preparation of data sets, can we bring more of the content that's outside of AR into the RFI process using Gen AI tools? Now, all of this, you might be thinking to yourself, require a lot of input and collaboration from across the organization. How much of it can you do on your own? Maybe some of the report creation that I mentioned, you can do on your own. Others, like the RFI, you're going to need collaboration and input from colleagues. So I actually see AR leadership having a certain role to play, as well as AR team members. So if you're an AR leader, you really do need to be thinking about how to take a leadership role in bringing these tools to your team. So making sure that the AR team is included in any kind of Gen AI training that happens at the organization, that your team members feel comfortable exposing their experimentation and their vulnerability and their lack of experience with Gen AI maybe, until you're all up to speed. So maybe you have workshops where you collectively work on use cases and share best practices with each other. Another is making sure that projects that are specific to the use cases for AR make it into your corporate development queue, and raising the flag to say, hey, we may not be the biggest team in the company, but we're doing some important work. And then, because AR is a content-rich business or operation, can you look to other similar content-rich types of scenarios to draw lessons to bring into the AR space? So it doesn't have to be only an AR use case that could be relevant to what you want to accomplish. It could be outside of AR. And in parallel, AR team members, you need to be a bit proactive. You need to seek out that training. You need to participate in that training. There's a lot of unknown out there, so it does require a little bit of courage and conviction, but seek it out, because I think at the end, the trade-offs could be something that you really benefit from. So that's kind of a section on Gen AI. The other issue that I'm encountering is that many AR folks struggle with how AR is perceived inside their organization. So there's a brand management issue and gap. And a lot of it has to do with the shaping of how internal stakeholders think about analyst relations. So if if I look across the conversations I have and the things I hear, some folks from AR feel like they're only looked to for for RFIs, and that they're RFI engines, as opposed to people who have access to information, who are well read on a topic and could be creative thinkers and thought partners. So that's a perception issue. Is AR conceived as an extension of business development and you're looked to bring in leads and deals? Or are you thought of more as a resource to enable better competitiveness and sales? And I'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. How much of the interaction, depending on the size of your organization, depending on the distinction of the different AR roles out there, how much of what you are looked to is for outbound communication to the market versus inbound, again, as a resource to bring information and insight that will help the company operate better? So there's a few different things that I think are ongoing struggles around AR brand. But the reality is, from senior leadership to delivery, so there's so many places. There's delivery, there's product management, there's sales education, is the issue of, how do you bring Gen AI and the resources of AR to the stakeholders across the company. So I'm noticing the time. I'm going to kind of go through the next few slides real quickly. This is the one area that I think it all comes together. We've gotten a lot of questions about the metrics around AR and how do you change and adjust metrics. And what I want to drive home is this concept that, as opposed to having a list of deals and somehow that is supposed to win business and AR is supposed to contribute to sales by bringing a list of deals, I advocate, as you could probably tell from the previous two slides, the idea, and what I'd love to hear from you about, is this idea of creating sustained groundwork that allows your sales organization to operate more effectively and be better prepared to compete. So how are you a resource for helping sales be a better competitor? Well, do they have a realistic knowledge of pricing and competitiveness dynamics? Can you help educate them in that way? Do they have the correct perspective on what's happening in their market? Are they pursuing the right accounts and the right targets? There's no point in pursuing targets and evaluating your success against those if the list is not the kind of accounts that are going to be interested in your business. How well is AR connected to individual salespeople who then influence the rest of their organization? And have those relationships been invested in? How about internal coaching around how to have a conversation with analysts that you do have access to? Does the salesperson know how to think about what that analyst can offer them? And can you coach them on that? What kinds of questions are salespeople afraid to ask? Are they nervous to talk to an analyst? Do they think the analyst will use the information in a way that's detrimental? I've heard all of this. So is there an opportunity for you to coach the salespeople or the BD people so that your investment in relationships with analysts drives more value? So these are some of the ways that I think sales is an opportunity. So when we think about that, what are the metrics? Can we change the conversation to say, I'm not about bringing you deals, but I can help you be more ready to compete. And let's have conversations about those kinds of metrics. So how often am I bringing to you tools and resources that allow the sales organization to be more effective? Is there content coming out of AR that's designed to be consumable by sales professionals? Is AR training part of your sales training program? So that's kind of a thing we haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but how well do the salespeople get trained on when and how to look at the AR organization? So you can develop metrics around that. And then conversely, if sales is expecting AR to generate some kind of return on investment, what are they doing to be part of that solution? So is sales coached to come to AR? Are they educated by the sales organization to look to AR? Are they encouraged to come and talk to AR as they prepare a particular pursuit or a particular client conversation? These are all things that we can spend more time talking about, but I think many of you that have experience in the field are thinking about this, but hopefully we have mechanisms in place now through Gen AI and other tools to actualize these in a more direct sort of way. So with that, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on Q&A. We had some questions that came in during our session, and I want to thank Alisha and Rajesh for responding to those as the conversation has moved forward. One of the things that we have not touched on that is part of our, we can build into our Q&A, you know, we've had a couple of questions coming in around CX, for example. It's a little outside the scope of today's conversation, but I wanted to let our audience know that we do quite a bit of work in customer experience. And if you take a few minutes to look at some of our upcoming events at Everest Group, you will see that we have a few webinars and LinkedIn Lives already scheduled, as well as a portfolio of published research that either has already been published or is forthcoming. So if you want more information about CX, take a look at our site as well as reach out to us. And we had a question about, how is Everest Group leveraging Gen AI? Let me reassure you, and Rajesh, as managing partner, I think you can comment on this. We have made quite a bit of investments in various areas of Gen AI for our research, all the way from the quality of our research to the quality of our analysis to the operation of our RFIs to the training of our analysts to be able to use the tools effectively. But Rajesh, as we wrap up, I wonder if you had a few comments about that.
No, I think you touched upon that, Katrina. Again, this is one of those, as I mentioned, this is one of those technologies that are going to touch, not only touch, but impact, all sorts of work, especially services-oriented work, right? We do recognize that as we kind of talk to the client, as talk about, but we also eat our own dog food. And that is what we are doing in terms of making sure that we leverage it to bring beyond, honestly, I know one of the questions is Gen AI is there, what is the need for an analyst? I'm just kind of putting it there, right? And that's the place where we have a challenge, and we will kind of look forward to your feedback, whether our research is out, is up to that mark or not, right? Our challenge is an opportunity is to kind of serve you leveraging Gen AI, but much deeper in your context to the goals that you are trying to achieve.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So hopefully you know that Everest Group is always looking for your feedback. We're always open to conversations. Our analysts are available. We're not behind any kind of barriers. So please use the resources we've made available to you to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Have a good evening, day, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.